Hello world, my name is Ian Johnson. Online I go by Angelot, and I want to talk to you about D3.js. My idea for this talk is to give you a guided tour of D3, not just the library and its API and its applications, but also the community, the various learning resources out there, and all the places that I get inspired for sure. So I do want to start out acknowledging that everything's different in 2020. Want to try giving this talk in a little bit of a different way. Normally I'd be up on a podium and clicking through slides showing you all kinds of examples and websites. What I've done instead is printed out a lot of websites and resources, placed them on the stairs behind me, and we're actually going to walk through literally this tour of D3, and I'll be giving thoughts on these different resources, context to where you can find more information. There'll be links for everything I show provided alongside this talk that you can click on and peruse. I mean, really, the thing that I love about D3 is just the crazy amount of things people make and the diversity and the varied expression that people come up with. There are over 40,000 open source D3 examples created by the community. There are dozens of tutorials, several really high quality books, all kinds of YouTube and video courses, online meeting places where people share work, help each other. So there's a lot of things to get oriented around and figure out. The other thing is that technically D3 is a library that touches a lot of browser technologies and a lot of design concepts. So when people say, oh, I want to learn D3, they're usually, what they don't realize maybe that they mean is I want to learn about 5 or 6 different disciplines. And one thing that I've found actually is that the D3 community is super welcoming, online, in person. I help host the San Francisco Bay Area meetups, at least while we're still getting together in person. And something you'll notice throughout is that people are generally really humble and really helpful, because it's pretty much impossible for one person to know everything you need to know to make successful data visualizations. I mean, there are definitely people that make amazing stuff, but you'll see actually that they learn and share their process and their techniques pretty openly and work together a lot. So it's a really inspiring community. I hope this talk gets you further into it. If you already make things with D3, hopefully you find out some new sources of inspiration and ways to learn. I know that I've been part of this community for almost 9 years now, and every day I find someone new, something cool that makes me want to try something else, look at the world, look at data with a different perspective. So with that, let's get started, and I'll take you on this tour. So part of the reason I wanted to give my talk like this is that when you're first exposed to D3, whether you came in off on the homepage that someone sent to you, you've seen some magnificent work by folks in the community, or on news sites, and maybe machine learning explanations, or the hundreds of examples, I wanted to acknowledge that the learning curve is quite steep, right? There's a lot of things to learn about, to get into, material to digest. However, I think with this tour, we'll see that we can actually climb these steps in a relatively short amount of time, point out what the most useful resources are, and get you started on what will be a longer, maybe a lifelong journey of learning data visualization. But we'll take it step by step and dive in. So let's start with the homepage itself. You can get a lot of the places you need to go from the homepage. There's examples, there's documentation and API links. But let's just quickly, since we'll get into the details of all of that as we walk these steps, just do a real brief overview of what D3 is and isn't, because for anyone coming to it, you might easily think that, oh, it's a charting library. But D3 is actually a little bit lower level. You can think of it more like a Swiss Army knife, a set of utilities that come in really handy very often in all kinds of different data visualization situations. And when you're authoring articles, when you're doing analysis, it's got all these little functions, all these tools that somebody, oftentimes Mike Bostock, has thought hard about making into a reusable function that you can pull from and not have to like figure out the calculations yourself or reinvent the wheel. So the other thing to keep in mind is that it's a JavaScript library, but it interfaces with common open standard browser technology like HTML, CSS, very often SVG, scalable vector graphics, is what is manipulated with D3 to create visualizations. But there is a lot of really powerful visualization done with Canvas, which is another HTML5 API, or even WebGL. So it's a layer, it's a set of tools. It can be thought of as a layer on top of the browser to enable you to author these amazing things. Speaking of that, I think one of the more exciting things you can do is look at works by prominent members of the community, folks like Shirley Wu, or really anything from the pudding as well. Like this Hamilton piece, which really, I think, demonstrates the expressive power of D3. Shirley used D3 in concert with these other browser technologies and a whole lot of design and passion for the subject matter to make a really impressive visualization. And it's these kind of bespoke, really beautifully crafted long-form articles that inspire a lot of people to want to be able to tell their stories, their data stories with D3 and share them online. Very much related is the data journalism that has become popular, especially from the New York Times, but also many other outlets are getting into it. The Washington Post, Routers, the list goes on, of course. But you can see some really interesting perspectives on what's going on in the world by looking at data and using visualization. And in 90% of the interactive visualization articles you see online, D3 is going to be utilized in there somewhere. Oftentimes it's going to be a really big component. Sometimes people will just pull small functions and use those, but guaranteed that if you're looking at an interactive visualization article, more likely than not, D3 has something to do with it. The other interesting domain where we're seeing more and more interactive visualization is in machine learning and data science. Being able to look at the data being learned and looking at the complex algorithms and the way they work using data visualization is really powerful. We're seeing this more and more both in blogs and articles as well as now research papers. For example, the Distilled Journal uses a lot of D3 visualizations to communicate really complex and cutting-edge research in new ways. So we have these varied examples of applications of D3, building things with D3. The other compelling thing about D3 and the D3 community is how many examples there are. There's just hundreds of examples of techniques. And so even something just like the idea of animating your visualization, you can see lots of amazing examples of how to do techniques that you would just not be able to do in prepackaged software. So transitions, custom animations, custom interactions, these things are all enabled by D3 if you know how to do it. And luckily, many folks have followed Mike's example in publishing not just finished products as open source, but also the examples of, what they're figuring out, what they're working out along the way. So this can be a great way to sort of gain new techniques, is by looking at a particular example and trying to bring it into your project, try to adopt that technique and apply it to your data. Beyond techniques like animation and interaction, there's also just hundreds of chart types. It goes beyond types, really. It's different ways of expressing different types of data. So if you have hierarchical data where you have trees or nested components, then there's a whole bunch of examples that can show you that. If you have network data, there's more examples for using different layouts to lay that out. If you have time series data, there's hundreds of examples there. So really, you start to get into this perspective of, instead of, oh, I have this type of data, I want this kind of chart, you can move a little more towards, how do I want to see this data that I have? What ways can I expose the patterns in it and communicate what I find? Now, to do that, you want to be able to use the library and use the technologies underneath, the HTML and the CSS and all that good stuff. And so many members of the community have made amazing blog posts and tutorials that can teach you the fundamentals, the basics, intermediate, and advanced subjects. This is a classic tutorial from Scott Murray, written many, many years ago. It is for an older version of D3. There have been a couple major version updates, but this has taught thousands of people how to get into D3. So I wanted to include it in this guided tour, of course, and then move on to maybe one of the more recent learning materials, which is this introduction to D3 on Observable. So I will take a moment to introduce Observable, which is a platform made by Mike Bostock, who is also the author of D3. It's now a company, a software product that is all about helping you think with data. So it's an online platform for making notebooks, like JavaScript notebooks, that are particularly well suited for making interactive data visualizations. So this tutorial series is on Observable, and you can play with it in your browser interactively, try stuff out as it's explaining these concepts to you. And it's a very nice place to get started. Many of the D3 examples, there's some 400 official D3 examples, are hosted on Observable now, which means that you can easily fork them and play with them in the browser before you try to incorporate them into your own projects. And there's also thousands of community members making and sharing notebooks on Observable. So it's definitely a great place to be learning D3 these days. And in full disclosure, it's where I work mainly because I love writing D3 and making visualizations in the platform. And so, I've mentioned examples, inspirations, tutorials. Of course, there's always going to be the good old book, right? So one of the most recent and comprehensive and beautifully made books in the D3 community is Full Stack D3 by Amelia Wattenberger. And I just wanted to call that out as an excellent resource. Many people recommend this. Amelia has made a series of impressive blog post tutorials, interactive tutorials that go accompany the book, where you can go and learn different aspects of D3 in the browser as well, with example code snippets. It's just a great resource for anyone getting into D3, and especially if like reading through a structured work helps you progress, I'd recommend this one for sure. Another book that I think is really powerful and important is not specific to D3, but it's called Info We Trust by R.J. Andrews. And it is a data visualization book. But if you are coming to D3 with the intent of, learning to do data visualization, which I think most people do, this is a really excellent resource. And I would say it's much more, it like rounds out the design side of things, the conceptual data visualization design aspects that will be really helpful when you're trying to put together your visualizations, whether it's for products or articles or analysis. Can't recommend this book enough. So this leads me to another classic book, which isn't going to help you learn D3 for sure, but the idea of the thinks you can think, like once you have some of this technical mastery and you have the design fluency, then you get new kinds of ideas. You can make things, you can think of new thoughts and imagine new kinds of visualizations. That's, to me, just really exciting and inspiring. So hopefully this tour, and then if you keep following up, will give you what you need to think new thinks. The thing is, of course, when you do start thinking new thinks, you get a lot of bugs. You try to make your visualization and you don't see anything on the screen. You try to require D3, you try to draw your first circle. So there's a bunch of resources you can use to get help. Just want to call out Stack Overflow, having thousands and thousands of questions people have answered over time. If you can't find your question as an existing one, there's a couple of good places online to ask new questions. One is the D3 mailing list. It's a little bit lower traffic these days, as email has been a little bit taken over by Slack, so and other channels. But we do actually have a pretty popular D3 Slack. It's got over 5,000 members in it. Folks in the help channel and learning material channels always sharing knowledge and asking and answering questions. So it's a great place to get involved and meet people in the community. Get your questions answered, definitely. But also to share work and connect with other folks. And that's something else I want to emphasize, which is that the community of people doing this stuff, many people share their process and their how they built what they did. I want to highlight in particularly Shirley Wu and Nadi Bremer's Data Sketches project, which is just, a phenomenal set of essentially case studies of building data visualizations from start to finish. From idea to pen and paper to D3 in the browser to polished and published. It's really fascinating, and I think that they've set quite a high bar for doing this. But because of that, so many people have been able to learn and adopt the techniques, and then other people in turn also share their work and their process, and we can learn from each other that way. Lately, a lot of those are shared on Observable, because it kind of makes it easy to expose the code underneath a particular technique. So Shirley and Nadi have also been building tutorials there, as have many other amazing folks. And if you're looking for amazing folks and the things that they share, one of the places that a lot of the work people do is shared out and communicated is on Twitter. So there is an official D3 Twitter. There are hashtags and D3.js and DataViz that you can of course follow and connect with folks. But I mean, personally, I love seeing all the cool things that go by on Twitter. So, as you're getting inspired, as you're getting connected, you probably want to learn more. With the way things are now, it can be hard to meet up in person. I do want to recognize that we have pretty vibrant communities and offline on meetup.com. The SF Bay Area group is also like 5,000 members. But of course, we're not really meeting in person here or in most other cities that have these. So we are trying out a D3 online meetup. Moving forward, we've had a couple on Zoom or Twitch and various platforms, gathering people from all over the world to have a meetup, and those have actually been really, really cool. It's really nice actually to be able to share an experience, like have speakers who may only normally have spoken in the Bay Area be attended by folks in different continents tuning in. Much like this, right? It's something that we didn't get as much of before, and so hopefully we can keep that the good part going forward. And so that brings up video, and I just do want to just call out that there are many video resources on YouTube, and you can search there for D3.js. A lot of nice courses and people talking about it. I've also posted many of our historical D3 talks and Bay Area talks on YouTube. Yeah, so we are nearing the top of the stairs now, and I drew this map a long time ago to have a sort of fun way to organize and try to make sense of all the different concepts and technologies that the D3 learning landscape had. Since then, Amelia Wattenberger has actually made an amazing set of tutorials on her D3 blog, where she uses a visualization, a circle packing of D3's API methods organized into their modules and broader categories of functionality. Now, there's actually just over 1,100 API methods in D3, and those are parts of 30 different modules. And Mike Bostock has categorized those 30 modules into 10 categories, which we can take a look at. So these 10 categories, we can go through each one, spend a minute or so looking at some examples, and give you a sense of the functionality that they provide. So let's start with one that is maybe the most often used. So this is the DOM category. D3 selection is the big module here. It has the join pattern in it, which lets you declaratively generate graphical elements from your data. And that's a pattern that is certainly a learning curve, but there are great resources out there to learn it. I'll call out D3 Axis briefly, just because it's a UI component. It generates SVG for you in all the million different ways that you might want to customize or specify how your axes look. That component will help you do it. And D3 transition is a really nice way to declaratively specify transitions and animations between states of your DOM. And that brings us over to another category of modules, animation, which are these three. So D3 Ease is a set of easing functions to help you control and customize your animations and your transitions. D3 Interpolate is a really nice utility. Oftentimes you don't even have to use it directly because transition uses it automatically, but it supports interpolating between all kinds of different data types, so numbers, strings, dates, colors, all that good stuff. And D3 timer is what D3 uses internally to time the animations and transitions. So the next major category of module is the data, and these actually have nothing to do with DOM elements and that kind of thing. So these are actually maybe even the most fundamental, and D3 scale especially is used by most visualization libraries that build charts and that kind of thing on top of D3. The other modules here are helpers with different, with arrays, fetching data, parsing comma-separated values, that kind of thing, as well as generating good random numbers. Next, we'll go into the layout. So the layout sets of modules are also data level tools. They don't generate graphics, they don't change elements in the browser. They transform a data set from one format into a format that's ready to visualize. And the force layout is something that you've probably seen somewhere, and chord and hierarchy are two other examples of layout modules. So geometry is a collection of several modules that help you generate geometry, things that you might want to customize shapes, paths, drawing arbitrary lines and areas, and contours, Delaunay. Next up, we have color, which is pretty much what it sounds like. You have a set of utilities for manipulating colors, like turning them from RGB to hex codes, that kind of stuff, as well as a whole lot of excellent color scales with plenty of information about when and how they can be used effectively, come from various scientific sources. Color on its own is an entire discipline. There's so much to learn there. So it's handy to have some of it, well thought out and ready to go. But even then, learning how to apply it is its own thing. Next up, we have the UI modules. So these are really, instead of UI components, these are more actually lower level interaction function. You can call them components, I guess, but you have to actually interface with the SVG or the HTML or the canvas directly. But these make it easier. You don't have to think about implementing drag behaviors, zooming, and brushing, and they do it in a way that zooming or brushing. And they have a standard interface with browser events. There's a whole section of mapping utilities in D3.geo. So it's one big module. There's a lot of projections in it. There's a lot of utilities for making maps. It's a very common data visualization task, of course. So it's got a lot of utility and a lot to look at, a lot to choose from. Again, a whole another discipline that you could go down. There's also a time module, which has a set of handy utilities for calculating time and generating data sets based on time. So something like you want an array of every hour for these 3 particular weeks. It has a couple functions that will make that pretty convenient to do. Functions that will make that pretty convenient to do. Finally, the last couple modules are these localization ones. This really emphasizes this Swiss Army knife, tool belt, workbench metaphor, where if you want to format numbers, which is something actually you very often do want to format them in particular ways, whether it's showing data about money or time or various amounts, scientific notation, that kind of thing. You have all of that in these two modules. So that brings us to our 10 categories. We went through 30 modules in less than 10 minutes. It's, of course, way too much, way too fast. It always is. But there's plenty of resources that we went through in the talk. You can check out all the links. A great community to get help from. I'll end on a drawing I made in the link to the blog post where you could actually check this out and read it. But it's all about, climbing this learning curve together as a community, using all the resources, whether it's examples, books, tutorials, and asking questions and meeting folks. So I hope this was helpful for you, that I see you online in the D3 community. Love to see what people make, and thank you for having me.